Well, happy Sunday, everybody. It's time for the weekend video. Get ready. Well, today I want to read you an email. It's one that I got this morning, and it's on the validity of the New Testament as whether or not it is actually Scripture. And this is something I've mentioned in a few other videos, but it never hurts to repeat. So I'm going to read you the email, and then I will answer you like I would answer these folks. And it says, "Hi Jeff, hope you're doing well. I'm trying to introduce the Gospel Revolution to my wife, and she's considering it but has many questions. One she brought up was about adding and taking away from the words of this book. A stumbling block to her is the New Testament not being considered as Scripture. What is this warning really about, and how do we explain it in light of the gospel of grace and peace? Any video of yours you could direct us to would be helpful, or any thoughts you might have that could clear this up for my wife and myself as well would be appreciated. Thanks, Jeff." And what they are quoting is at the end of the book of Revelation, and says any adding or taking away the words of this book, that was a warning. Now, in my background in Christianity, that verse was actually used to apply to the whole Bible, but the writer of that book, or whoever put that in that book, the Bible was nowhere in their imagination, because this was hundreds of years before the Bible we know today was ever even thought of. So he was referring, number one, to the letter he just written, and he calls it a book. And so whether that was John or not, it could have been, but I doubt it, because back when all these letters were being written, which was like 70 AD on, in the 70s and the 80s, these letters were being copied by what they called scribes. And a lot of people, rich people, paid scribes to make copies. And a lot of times, a lot of the copies that were being sent around of original letters were being tampered with. People were adding to them or taking away from them. So whoever wrote this, but most likely whoever copied it and tampered with it, put this warning that they will suffer eternal damnation. And I believe it also says, in all of the judgments and plagues that are in this book, they're going to suffer that. It's the strongest warning they could, to make sure, if anybody copied it, that they did not change anything that was said in that book. So that was just a warning going out to all the copiers out there. But as for whether the New Testament is Scripture or not, the New Testament was put together in the 4th century, and a group of people got together a few times in a couple of councils. And the book of Revelation, actually, by the way, never made it into the first canon. It was highly contested, but it did finally make it in. But a lot of the books that were put into the New Testament were highly contested. And as for the New Testament being Scripture, it would have been great if they put together a collection of all these letters and books and epistles and put it into a book. But the audaciousness that they had, they wanted to elevate these letters to the same authority as the Scriptures, because up until they did this, the Scriptures were just the Hebrew Scriptures, which was the Scriptures in the Old Testament. They were Scripture because those scriptures, the purpose of them all along was to foretell the Messiah. They all spoke of Jesus Christ in a mystery, but they spoke about Jesus Christ. And it was sheer audacity on these people's part to actually put it together all in one book with the Hebrew scriptures and call it all scripture. It wasn't the case. As for tampering with these letters, which is another reason why it's not scripture, because the Jews handled the scriptures of the Old Testament very carefully. They never got tampered with. They had a very strict quality control on how they were copied, so they never got tampered with. The New Testament letters, a lot of them are tampered with. A lot of them are not even considered by the authors they say they are, and so you have to actually judge the scriptures or the New Testament against the scriptures, number one. And number two, when it comes to the gospel, it's the same rule. You've got to judge it against the scriptures, because it is very distinctly clear that Paul had his distinct presentation of the gospel, and it differed greatly from Peter, James, and John, and Jude, who are the other authors of the books in the epistles. Most of Paul's books are accepted as pretty clean and original, but not all of them. Some of them are also highly contested. However, Romans and Galatians and the book of Hebrews, which we believe is written by Paul, are extremely reliable. The books of Corinthians are pretty reliable, except for one part of 1 Corinthians where Paul tells women not to speak in the church but to remain silent, and then just a few verses later he says how women are supposed to speak and prophesy in the church. So he contradicts himself just a few lines later from saying they shouldn't speak in the church. And it turns out that the first statement, where women are supposed to be silent in the church, was added, and it was not in the earlier transcripts. This is one reason why you really don't want to call the New Testament writings scripture. Another example, one of my favorites, because it's one of my favorite passages in the first four Gospels, and it's the story about how a woman was caught in adultery. They bring her to Jesus. He's writing in the sand, and then he tells them, whoever's without sin to cast the first stone. I'm afraid that whole story was never in the earliest transcripts, or manuscripts. So it was one of my favorites, but I get it. Somebody added it. So the New Testament is to be scrutinized. There's a lot of valuable things to learn in the New Testament. You can see how Paul differed with the original disciples, and you can verify what Paul says when he presents his gospel against the scriptures themselves. He was a Pharisee. He was educated in the scriptures, and he refers to the scriptures, whereas Peter, James, and John, they just refer to their time with Jesus and how they think things should be now. So, and that is why we preach the gospel in accordance with what Paul writes, because we can also verify them with the scriptures that Paul himself refers to. So, I hope that helps you understand why that warning was in the book of Revelations, but also why the New Testament, even though it's a valuable source for learning things and getting a handle on who said what and what is gospel truth, but why it still is not scripture. It's revolutionary. I know. Have a revolutionary week.